We are live.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Joint Justice Oversight Committee, and today we're joined by other representative senators from various committees because of the subject matter is health, prison health, as well as competency evaluations. And we have what was handed out last week or last time we met, which is the committee work for 2023 interim. And Senate Representative Emmons will pass those around. We also have a letter from the Commissioner of Corrections from Representative Emmons' committee regarding some of the work on the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. Sorry. So, I'm Dick Sears. I chair the Senate Judiciary Committee, member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and chair of this committee. And others to introduce themselves, starting with Representative.
State Representative Alice Evans. I chair the House Corrections and Institutions Committee, and I'm also vice chair of this particular committee.
Senator Keisha Hinsdale. I chair Economic Development, and we will be having a housing hearing on August 15th. Just so folks know, it's obviously usually central to recidivism issues and other struggles that people are facing that are compounded with the flooding. And I apologize in advance if I look at my phone. My 3-month-old is in the pro tem's office right now. So that is hopefully going to go great. And it's also a public service announcement in case anyone needs some baby time.
Good morning, Senator Bob Norris, Franklin County, to include Elward in the county of Grandisle. I sit on Senate Judiciary along with Senate Gov Ops. It's good to see everybody.
Good morning, Representative Teresa Wood. I'm chair of the House Human Services Committee, and I serve the communities of Bolton, Buell, Huntington, and Waterbury.
Morning, Irene Renner. I represent Chittenden North, which is Milton, Westford, Essex, the rural part of Essex, and Fairfax, which is in Franklin County. I am the clerk of the Agriculture Committee as well as the clerk of institutions in the Senate.
Hi, everybody. I am Martine Maroc-Ulick. I am a senator from Chittenden Central, Burlington, Winooski, a little bit of Colchester, and part of Essex. I am clerk of Health and Welfare and vice chair of Senate Education.
Good morning, Senator Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County. I believe I'm here because I'm a vice chair of Health and Welfare. I also sit on the Education Committee. Morning.
Dr. McFawn. I'm the vice chair of the Healthcare Committee. I represent Barrytown and a part of Williamstown.
Martin Lalone, representative from South Burlington. I'm the chair of House Judiciary Committee.
Trevor Swirl, representing Underhill and Jericho. I'm on House Appropriations, and I also chair the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules.
Good morning. Jenny Lyons. I chair Senate Health and Welfare, and I sit on Justice Oversight Committee. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And the conversation today, I think, is exceedingly important. There are a lot of things going on here. I've been talking recently with Medicaid about their work with folks who may be transitioning out of the Department of Corrections.
We also have online Representative Golden. I think she just.
There she comes.
Yeah, I'm here. Leslie Goldman, representing Wyndham 3, Rockingham, Westminster, and Brookline on the House Healthcare Committee.
Thank you. And we also have Peggy Delaney, who's called a committee assistant, but she really runs the committees. And Ben Novogelsky, who is our able legislative counsel, does a terrific job for us on this committee. So with that, I'm going to start. The first topic is healthcare in Vermont prisons. And we have Leslie Thornton, who's a spokesperson for the Vermont Justice Coalition, who join us at the table.
Okay, Meg McCarthy is going to introduce us.
We're going to be getting up and down and up and down.
Okay, well.
Different.
Yep, all right.
Okay.
Whatever.
Okay, good morning. It's nice to have met everybody, although I don't remember You all are. My name is.
Well, our name tags most,
There you go. Okay.
that helps.
Maybe. My name is Meg McCarthy, and I'm from Marlborough, Vermont, in Windsor County. And I'm a member of Vermonters for Criminal Justice. No, I'm not. For Vermont Just Justice, I used to be. We're a group of volunteers working for change in Vermont's legal system, and we have ties with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. We have loved ones in Vermont prisons that range in age from 21 to 71. I myself have been living with incarceration for 12 years. Most of us have been involved with or are still involved with other justice organizations such as Alley's Line, Vermont Cure, Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform, which I was once a member of many years ago. We're currently focused on healthcare due to the April death of David Mitchell. We wanted to shine a light not on just on his death, but on the experience of people inside our prisons, people with no agency over their health care. We felt that if Vermonters and our legislators knew what people were experiencing, they would demand change. Members of this group are in a unique position of having a direct line to the incarcerated. We gathered over a dozen stories of inadequate health care from people in and out of prisons that were eventually sent to the legislators on the Joint Justice Committee. And we hope affected people will be testifying today. One will be not on Zoom, but will be on the computer screen, and the other one we hope will make it in person. We collected the stories by sending out an email blast to people that read our blog, and also reaching out to people that are on a Facebook group. And we got 12 stories that we eventually sent out to the committee. More came in after the fact, but we started with the 12 that we sent to you all. And our takeaways were a comprehensive lack of mental health services, lack of skill and resources among health care workers in prison, barriers to preventing action to address urgent medical needs. And here I will add the one barrier that I believe happens, and that is that both staff people in the prisons and medical staff in the prisons, I believe, because I was trained to be a volunteer in the prisons, they are trained to doubt. They're trained to be skeptical when people are asking for help. And the reason is, I believe that sometimes people exaggerate their needs and they just want attention or whatever. But I think that that is a serious issue when it comes to people that are really suffering a medical problem. And I think that we've seen that several times in our systems and sometimes resulting in death. Changes to protocols when people come incarcerated, they'll come into the prisons with a certain set of medical needs, and the medical team in the prison will tell them, we're not doing that. We're doing something different. And that often causes some serious problems for that person. Deaths soon after release, in addition to those incarceration due to lack of care in prison. One of the stories we collected was from a woman's friend. The woman was in Chittenden and had been complaining about rectal issues for a long time, and they told her she just had hemorrhoids and gave her aspirin. And when she was finally released, she was told that she had terminal colon cancer. I may be getting the details of that story incorrect, but that's the gist of it. DOC structure, culture and structure make it difficult for people to get the care they need and have their grievances addressed. And I think I talked a little bit about that when I talked about the barriers preventing action. And we listened to this committee's last meeting and know that several of you had questions. So we are going to try to address those questions this morning. Okay. The first one that I am going to address is the question of nutrition.
Did you identify yourself as record?
Yeah, do I need to come up or can I speak?
Well, are you testifying?
Yeah, I will be speaking to.
Okay, well,
I did identify myself at the beginning. Is that who you're asking?
I think you introduced yourself at the beginning, yes.
I did, yes.
I'm asking, if somebody else speaks, they need to identify themselves for the record. That's what I was.
Okay. So my name is Jonathan Elwell. I live in Brattleboro. And yeah, I'll be speaking to this point about, older and sicker, which is a line that you all heard when folks from the DOC were testifying to this committee last month. It's a line that the public has heard quite a few times throughout the spring as there's been a focus on healthcare. And I think it's really, really important to talk about because it kind of illuminates some of the dynamics around these issues. So this line is used to explain away preventable deaths and make them seem inevitable because these people are so old and so sick. And it really obscures the role that DOC plays and that sentencing policies play in creating this older and sicker population. So there are two sides of it. First, with the sicker side, the fact is that prison makes people sicker. And this is not some sort of like radical conjecture. This is from the DOC's own data. From the print studies that have been conducted in Springfield at Southern State, we see that both incarcerated people and folks who work in corrections in that facility are reporting these outcomes due to their time at Southern State working and living there. And these numbers, just to be clear, the phrasing of the question is, since starting work in corrections, I've developed the following. And then people were given boxes to check, or since entering prison, I've developed the following. So this is not the percentage of folks who come into prison experiencing these conditions. It's the percentage of folks who develop these conditions during their time in prison. And so the numbers are really striking. Over 2/3 developing anxiety or depression, over half developing PTSD. Also physical ailments like obesity or high blood pressure are very common. And that's for incarcerated population. For the correction staff, over half developing anxiety, over 40% developing depression and PTSD. These are really serious numbers that make it clear people don't just come into prison sicker, they get sicker in prison. And the other side is this aspect of the older population. So that has a lot to do with our sentencing because it's not that older people are committing more crimes or that the majority of folks coming into prison are older than they used to be. Those numbers are actually pretty stable in terms of the ages of people who are becoming incarcerated. These are older folks who have been there for decades. The crimes that they were convicted of happened decades ago. For the most part, these are people who are, pro-social, who want to return to their communities and who clearly also need the resources that are in their communities, not in prisons, to keep them healthy. And so the other side of this is also if people truly are so old and sick, they really don't seem to present the kind of threat, of someone who we're told needs to be, kept in prison to protect the community. So yeah, I appreciate y'all listening to that point because it's kind of a window to, explore these dynamics. And now we're on to the questions.
So I took the question about nutrition and I did a little bit of research and I found out that the Farm and Institute New England with the Vermont Law School had done a study on prison nutrition all over New England. And they found that the prison meals cost $1.23 on average. That's about less than half the cost of a school meal. I haven't been able to get the specific data from DOC. I did ask them because I wanted to know what the average cost specifically for Vermont was, and maybe somebody at DOC can help with that information at some point. The sample meals appear to be varied, but a closer look shows that they are weighted heavily towards processed carbs and sugars and breads, and a little bit light on protein, vegetables, and fruit. And it also gives the impression that the portions are measured, but some portions are not measured. Sometimes they're a little heavier handed with pasta, for instance, and a little bit light on the meat or a slice of cantaloupe. The vegetables are often overcooked and unappealing. People often report that they're hungry after meals. And according to the Prince survey, again, over 50% say they don't get enough to eat. Nearly 70% say the quality of food does not support a healthy lifestyle. It's impossible from the menu to tell how much this food is overprocessed. The AMA website says the concerns of overprocessed foods, ultra-processed foods, is an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and dementia. And if we look at the commissary, we will see that the commissary is really loaded with ultra-processed food. In fact, if you look at the cereals that are offered, there are 3 cereals, and they're all almost like a child cereal. They're very sweet and sugary. And there is a beverage that is served every day on the menu, and that is loaded with preservatives and sweeteners, and some sweeteners that have kind of iffy background to them. And the package itself says not for daily consumption, and they receive it at every dinner. There's no nutritional value if you look at the ingredients in this beverage. So suicide, it's going to be taken by.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Canfield, and I live in Burlington. So I wanted to answer your questions that you all had last time about suicide protocols in the DOC. So I'm going to give you my personal experience. So my son is incarcerated. And I wanted to just kind of get you to think about what we all have heard about the thing to do if you know someone is suicidal, right? We've been told, find someone you trust to talk, and so I'm my son's trusted person. We talk every day, multiple times. Sometimes he's 21. He went in when he was 19. He went through a really difficult time, and he does go up and down, but he was talking on the phone and he said, Mom, I feel so depressed and scared. I feel like I want to kill myself. So those were his words. Hung up the phone, immediately was taken to the hole. So the hole is solitary confinement. And so right now, I fully understand the DOC's responsibility to keep people alive. Like, I'm not disputing that that's a responsibility that we have to take seriously. But for him to be taken to the hole and then moved to what we call a suicide cell, you're stripped of your clothing. So he was wearing a paper smock. And it was like a Friday afternoon, and it was a holiday weekend. So he did not get any attention from mental health staff. I know they do checks every 15 minutes, but that's a guard. It's not anybody with mental health training. He wasn't allowed to call me. He wasn't allowed to have books, nothing to write with. I finally was able to get him a journal. I think on Monday I called and I just said, please, can someone bring him a journal so he can write? So, it's really embarrassing to have your clothes taken away from you. I understand that that's for safety, so that you're not going to try to do anything with your clothing or your bedding. But he sat for 5 days until somebody got back to work after the holiday and could talk with him. At that time, it wasn't even a psychiatrist that he spoke with. It was a nurse or someone from the medical staff that was just checking in with him. And of course, at that point, he's going to say, I'm fine. I'm not going to do anything. And my takeaway from that was, what person is going to want to talk about how they were really feeling if they know what the consequences are if they say those words? That's our current standard in the DOC for someone who's feeling suicidal. We got to put them over here and take their stuff away, and that feels like punishment. So I think we could be doing better with that. I think there needs to be a way for people to feel like they can trust the system, that they can really talk about how they're feeling if they're at that place in their life. I'm going to move to the next question for mental health treatment. And you all asked, what does mental health care in prison actually entail? My son came into prison after having a full year, right when the pandemic started, of psychotic breaks. And we were not able to get him the care he needed because people were locked down. We couldn't get to providers. Telehealth was at best, what can you really do with telehealth if you're a 19-year-old who's having psychotic breaks for the first time? So he ended up in jail. Of course, there's more to the story, but my feeling is that his mental health was a big reason that he ended up there, and it was during the pandemic. He did not get any kind of full diagnosis when he came in. So we just don't have the setup to do that. I know they do an intake, and I know they ask a lot of questions, but it's not a full psychiatric diagnosis. And so you have a young person, 19 is a critical age for things like schizophrenia and bipolar to start. You have a young person coming in with these symptoms. Why are we not having a fully trained psychiatrist do an intake and get a diagnosis? He ended up on some meds. I think some of them are helpful, but I've spoken with psychiatrists about what he's on, and they feel like that's probably not exactly what he needs, and he doesn't have a diagnosis. So I think we could be doing better with that. There's no counseling. There's no group therapy. There's no kind of what we would in the community want to have for mental health treatment if we ourselves are experiencing some of these things. He ends up spending a lot of time on his tablet because that feels like the safest place for him. But I don't feel like that's going to get him the treatment he needs when he gets out. So my feeling about mental health is if we really want our communities to be safer, this is the place to start, because if we can do good diagnosing, we can do good treatment plans, we can carry that over to the community so they're going to have that continuity when they get out, our communities are going to be safer. So that was what I thought about suicide and mental health. And I think we're going to have Tim talk about sick leaves.
Morning. My name is Timothy Burgess. I'm a member of the Vermont Just Justice Coalition. I'm also the state director for Vermont Cure. And in addition to all of that good stuff, I have been incarcerated. And I am a person who works with people who are incarcerated currently. So in terms of turnaround time on sick slips, I'll go from my own experience and sort of give you an update on what I'm hearing from people who are currently incarcerated. So my own experience, and this is over 5 or 10 years ago, was that sick slip turnaround time was approximately 5 to 7 business days. Now, if you slip and hurt your arm, and I'm not even talking about breaking your arm, I'm talking about just hurting yourself. You start on Monday, let's say, and you say, I really just need Tylenol. And that doesn't happen until Friday or the following Monday. Generally, a small issue can go away in that time, and then you're called to medical and they assume that we're just making it up to get out of whatever. That was my experience. Having a heart condition, having a pacemaker, which I got after my incarceration, but certainly happened during the blood pressure, and the heart condition developed strongly during my incarceration. The issues that I dealt with were the issues of if I got dizzy or started sweating or had chest pains, there was a reaction as if you'll be all right. Go to your cell, take a nap. Those things may have improved since I've been there, but that's not what I'm hearing from people who are currently incarcerated. The people I'm hearing from who are currently incarcerated are saying that those turnaround times are still within 3 to 7 days, which is 2 days. I'll give the credit there. And it's a problem. It's a real problem. If you have a headache and you need a Tylenol, as I said earlier, by the time you see medical or by the time they prescribe this was my experience, by the time they prescribe the Tylenol, well, you don't need it anymore. And now you're on a course, by the way. They continue that track. While you ordered Tylenol in April and in June, you're still getting Tylenol at every medical call. So that tends to be a problem that I experienced and that people who are currently incarcerated are experiencing. But those are my stories, and if I can answer any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm Leslie Thorson, and I have been a hospital-based registered nurse for 45 years. I also did a very small stint in the Windsor Work Farm, where I did 35 years ago. I did get to witness some compassionate healthcare there. I would like to talk about the healthcare in prison versus in the community, and I'm going to do that under the umbrella of sciatica. I'm going to use that as an example. So in the community, let's say an individual wakes up with searing nerve pain going down their leg. They can call their medical provider and they can get an appointment. So you have a closed loop form of communication. You've got your appointment. You can go to your medicine cabinet and take an ibuprofen. When you are in prison, you are going to be filling out your sick slip and you're going to be waiting. You're going to be waiting for a response. You're going to be waiting to find out if your sick slip made it to medical. So you have an open-ended question, am I going to get care? And you cannot go to your medicine cabinet to take an ibuprofen. So when an individual arrives in the community with their healthcare provider, they're going to get a hands-on assessment. Their concerns are going to be addressed, and they most likely will receive the conservative evidence-based treatment for sciatica, which is going to be ibuprofen, or another NSAID, and rest. When an individual, but most importantly, you're going to get a follow-up appointment. So in 6 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks, if it has not resolved, you already have an appointment for going back to your doctor. And if you need to call for a question or your condition worsens, you can make a phone call. In prison, when you're finally seen in medical, it's most likely going to be telehealth. You're not going to have a hands-on assessment. You're going to have a telehealth assessment, and you're probably going to get that first conservative evidence-based treatment of the ibuprofen, rest, and ice. You're going to be instructed that if you need to come back for this issue, you know how to fill out a sick slip. So you're not going to have your guaranteed follow-up appointment. So 6 weeks go by, the individual goes back to their community provider, and they still have sciatica. What is going to happen then is an MRI is going to be ordered. Because sciatica is not a disease, it's a symptom. So why are you still having this symptom after the conservative treatment? So an MRI will be ordered, and based on that result, you might be referred to a back clinic or to a specialist. If you go put your sick slip in and you get back to medical when you're incarcerated with your same sciatica pain, you are going to get that same conservative treatment. You're going to get the ibuprofen renewed. And this is exactly where the evidence-based standard of community care and prison care diverge. The healthcare model in prison does not reflect a community healthcare model. I feel that intentionally not ordering an MRI or a follow-up study for an individual suffering with sciatica is a form of willful negligence. I also feel that pursuing a willfully negligent healthcare model for profit needs to change. And when conditions are not treated, they get worse, as we have seen. Next will be Jonathan.
So this is Jonathan Howell again. This next slide is going to be presented by Will Hunter, who's on Zoom.
I'm sorry, I'm unmuted now. So can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. My name is Will Hunter, and I would have liked to have been there this morning with you. I'm in Springfield, Vermont, where I run a housing program where I house a number of people who have been recently incarcerated. And the reason I'm not there with you this morning is that yesterday I was confronted with the release of two people, one of whom I had no advance notice was going to get released, and he was released homeless as he was maxing out. He wanted to borrow some money from me to pick up his meds, and because he has a chronic alcohol problem, which is why he's locked up, I told him that I would pick up the meds for him at the pharmacy. When I got to the pharmacy, I was told that there was a prior authorization that was required, and that they had no idea who needed to do what to have that happen. I presented him with that information, and he decided that he would like to go to New Hampshire and relocate there. And I loaned him some money so he could get a ride to New Hampshire. The other fellow who I did know was going to be getting out, I had attempted, because he has a long history of mental problems and I've housed him before, I attempted to talk with the mental health providers in the prison ahead of time to find out what medication he was on and make sure that he would have it when he got out. Even though he was willing to sign a release, the medical or mental health people apparently were not willing to talk with me. And so yesterday when he got out, I picked him up at probation and we went down to the pharmacy. He had a slip in his packet of materials indicating that his psychiatric medication was being called in last Friday. When we got to the pharmacy, there was no record that anything had been called in for him. By this time, it was 4:30. I tried to call the jail, and when you call the jail, you have an option to talk to the mental health and get the numbers.
You muted. Oh, he muted. No, we lost him. Gone. Must be in his car.
Oh, this is the world of computers.
I sent an email out to everybody I think of to see whether anything could be done. I didn't get any response from anybody official, but I did contact Jen Canfield, who you heard from a few minutes ago, and she gave me the name of Annie Ramnisino. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but I sent her a copy of the email that I had sent, and first thing this morning, I got an email from her saying that she had instructed that this be dealt with promptly this morning. And I called Rite Aid a little bit before this meeting began and found that yes, now there is a prescription there. And in a couple of hours, probably after we finish with this hour-long segment, I'll be able to go pick it up. I'm using these two examples because they are absolutely typical of what I experience almost always with people when they come out of prison. Many of them are prescribed Suboxone, but many of them don't have Medicaid, so they have no way of getting the Suboxone when they get into the community. I have gone through making phone calls and sometimes being lucky enough to get a really cooperative Medicaid worker who gets the Medicaid in place, but I'm trying to provide housing and I'm trying to provide some support, but it shouldn't depend on me being able to know how to navigate the system for people who have mental, physical, financial problems to get the medication that some professionals have determined they need. The fellow, the alcoholic who's now gone to New Hampshire, a couple of times I got calls while he was incarcerated asking if I could transport him to Valley Vista because apparently the Department of Corrections couldn't get him there. One of the times I did it, I wasted an afternoon. He never was ready. And then by the time he was ready, found out there wasn't a bed for him. The next time that he was ready and I got him in the car, we had to stop to get his medications to go there. And once again, when we got to the pharmacy, nothing had been called in and more time went on. So these, I could give you many, many more examples, but I think you get the drift. If we're concerned about making sure that there is a seamless transition from incarceration to the community and that people continue to get the help they need, we need to do a lot better, and I think we can.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Nice to hear from you again.
Thank you, Dick.
I think, Jonathan?
Yes, this is Jonathan Noble again. And I know we have more to share, so I'll try to keep it moving quickly.
Are we to the gap or are you still in the healthcare versus concerns about WellPath? Okay.
Yeah, so just quickly, before we hear from some folks who have very recent experience or current experience being incarcerated, it's important, to note this transition. There are kind of two aspects of the move to WellPath. So first, being clear that historically, over the last decade or more, as different for-profit companies have come in and out of providing healthcare in Vermont prisons, not a lot has changed. Most of the staff stays the same. Many of the protocols and policies stay the same or very, very similar. So it's likely that not much will change, but it's also fair to be skeptical that things could get worse because WellPath, as you see here, does have an extensive list of scandals and criticism. You can read the quotations there. I won't do that so we can keep rolling. But it's also important to note that this isn't just some sort of skepticism. This is already happening. So I heard from incarcerated people last week. They shared with me a memo that was shared with them from DOC, which acknowledged that on July 23rd at Northwest State in St. Albans, quote, an estimated 15 incarcerated individuals received Tylenol with codeine instead of your scheduled Subutex. So these are folks who are part of the medication-assisted treatment program or in recovery from opioid addiction who were relapsed because they got the wrong medication. So these are really significant issues. And this is not just one or two, cups that got mixed up with 15 people. And it's also just an estimated 15. We're not sure. So it's hugely concerning. And it's also important to note that in terms of the remedies that are available to people in these positions, again, quoting from the memo, it said that if they have any issues, to quote, reach out to medical by completing a sick call slip with your concerns. So again, we've heard, from multiple people about the issues with the sick call system and how it takes lots of time to address the issues if they're ever addressed. And so this is just one example of how things have changed and potentially not for the better with WellPath. And now I'm going to hand it over to Tiffany Harrington to share about her experience.
Thank you very much for having us here, and I will try to not be super long. I had to write mine down because if I don't, I just go and go. So. I'm here today as a directly impacted formerly incarcerated person of the Vermont correction system. My name is Tiffany Harrington, and I was under supervision of DOC for 15 years for my first and only criminal charge. I now work with Free Her Vermont for the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. I could talk for hours and tell you countless true stories and examples of the negative impact that corrections has had on me and my friends and family. Today, however, I want to briefly discuss the reality of prison culture, how different it is from what the general public is led to believe, and frankly, how extremely dangerous and detrimental it is to a vulnerable group of people who are oftentimes caught up in a cycle of poverty, crime, and substance abuse because they can't see any other option to stay afloat or get ahead other than to commit crimes for survival. Our society needs alternatives to incarceration that actually address underlying problems, ultimately correcting something versus breaking our communities down. DOC estimates that it costs about $100,000 per year to keep a female inmate housed. When someone has medical issues and is at high risk for a number of physical or mental health conditions, I'm sure that number skyrockets and it's quite a bit more than that. All of my pregnancies have been high risk. I've given birth to 5 sons, 2 of which while I was housed in the Vermont correction, in the facility. I had preeclampsia in all of them. My 3-year-old son was born via C-section while I was maxing out my 15-year supervision sentence inside the prison. Despite being incarcerated simply for not being able to afford a residence by myself with no familial or from financial support from anyone that they deemed approved or good enough. Truly, it would have been incredibly advantageous, less of a hassle, and significantly more cost-effective to keep me in the community under an alternate supervisory program that addressed not only my needs, but the needs of my soon-to-be-born child. Despite being hungry, incredibly uncomfortable, and unsupported by outside means, I did my best to keep my head up and stay positive. When I approached medical staff with various valid concerns, they generally ignored me or just told me to drink some water, which was their catch-all solution. Drink some water and rest. Countless ailments they went largely untreated, but I always believed in choosing a positive mindset, so I did. I worked a job in a facility, I earned $3 a day, I stayed active, I went outside and walked, trying to keep my health as good as I could. And when I was released, I got admitted to the one home, which was awesome. But anyway, I want to talk about what happened with my C-section. I'll skip that part. I had a C-section on November 1st, 2019. While I was in the hospital, I did begin showing signs that physically something was really wrong. Usually my blood pressure is pretty low and steady, but it was bouncing all over the place and it was extremely high. Very, very scary. With my medical history of preeclampsia, the doctors and nursing staff were becoming really concerned. However, DOC and CRCF required the CO to be at the hospital with me at all times. I remember one male officer wouldn't even leave the room while a doctor examined my, lady area. It was really humiliating. And the doctor even told him, please stand outside the room next to the door. She can't even walk. They just had a very painful major surgery. When it came time for my discharge from UVM Medical Center, the nurses were really scared to get me back to the facility for fear of my health and safety, because they had seen a lot of people go back and not receive the care they were supposed to get. The hospital staff called CRCF medical staff and gave them very, very clear instruction to keep me on all these medications and to check my blood pressure at least 3 times a day, but preferably every 4 hours, as my blood pressure was indicative of a problem. I was really struggling being separated from my newborn, and they promised the hospital that they would allow these orders. Literally, as soon as I returned to the facility, the medical staff chose to ignore the medical instructions. Day after day, I felt worse and worse. I put in sick call slips after sick call slips, and I said something at every medication, like MedPass. I kept getting blown off. There wasn't anyone available to check in with me psychologically either, and all I thought about was ending my life. My friends on the unit could see that I could barely stand up and were putting in medical slips on my behalf as well. This is about 2 weeks after I'd given birth, and I'd yet to have my blood pressure checked. 2 weeks. This is like having your blood pressure checked is a simple, non-invasive procedure, which not only takes less than a minute, but requires little to no training to perform. Finally, my friend on the unit called her friend who was working for the ACLU, who then called the prison and convinced the medical staff to come take my blood pressure right away. It was so high, I wasn't even allowed to walk back to the unit or even get off the exam table. It was that bad. They called an ambulance immediately. When the ambulance arrived, loaded me into the back and started an IV. And literally on the ride to the hospital, I lost consciousness and started having seizure activity. Apparently, they thought I was starting to have a stroke. Upon arrival, I was immediately admitted. And my head felt like it was going to pop right off. I had postpartum eclampsia, which is a really dangerous and often fatal condition. And I had to stay in the hospital for close to 2 weeks to get it under control. I had resulting damage to my brain and organs as well. I almost died because the medical staff at CRCF chose to ignore strict medical orders from the hospital. There are so many stories like this that would absolutely stun you. Oftentimes, it's systemic inadequacies and flaws that create the conditions for inhumane treatment. When this kind of egregious behavior and mistreatment becomes commonplace and individuals in power position engage in it, it reinforces the idea that these folks are less than. Their lives, dreams, and families are not valued, and their existence is worthless. The lack of medical, dental, psychological, psychiatric, and substance abuse disorder treatments leave these individuals in much worse states, if not dead, when they enter prison. Free Heart Vermont is advocating for alternative corrective actions instead of jails and prisons. Please feel free to, look us up online or, and join us at any of our events or anything like that. But basically, it's literally medical negligence, and it's something that happens very, very frequently there. So I just, want to reiterate that that's, a really scary thing to have to go through. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to share the screen again to listen to someone who is unable to be here today because they're currently incarcerated in Newport.
Okay.
The sounds.
Oh, I should do that. Electronic device on.
It doesn't work when someone's in the room trying to play a video. They have to.
Yeah, they got the sound, they got the sound.
Okay, we could not get a live video from an individual who's presently incarcerated with a very serious diabetic condition. And I'm going to talk, what I'm going to be talking about now is changes we hope to see, and I will talk a little bit about that, mindful of the time. Anyway, what we would like to see for better healthcare in prison is independent medical oversight by a Vermont non-Department of Corrections provider on a weekly basis. We feel like, outside eyes looking at the sick slips, are they being appropriately cared for or not? So we would like to see independent medical oversight by a non-DOC medical provider. I know when a lot of these sick slips are grieved, they go through a process of people who are not medical, the people that are in place employed by the state of Vermont. A medical person is not reviewing the grievances. And in fact, when the grievances get to the Defender General's office, that's an office full of lawyers, well-intentioned, but not medically trained. We would like to see maintain the continuity of care provided from a community provider, which we already spoke about. If someone is on a certain medication, keep them on that medication. It works for them. The community provider knows them. We would really like to see evidence-based practice of care equivalent to Vermont Medicaid. If you would look at Medicaid as the minimally adequate health care in our state, why are our incarcerated folks not receiving the Medicaid standard of care? And for an example, Medicaid pays for an insulin pump for certain high-risk diabetics who have a difficult time controlling their diabetes. Oftentimes it's juvenile onset diabetes, not an older in life diabetes where if you exercise and lose weight and take an oral hypoglycemic, your blood sugars will come under control. But people who have really bouncing around blood sugars, it damages their bodies severely. Medicaid does pay for an insulin pump. So prison healthcare in Vermont denies the community level of care with the insulin level of the insulin pump. And it's actively contributing to the debilitating complications of uncontrolled blood sugars in a detained individual who we did have on the screen. Blindness, amputations, and kidney failure are to name a few. I believe this is negligence. Negligence with resulting harm is called medical malpractice. All in the name of private equity corporate for-profit prison less than minimally adequate health care in our state. So that is changes we'd like to see. Continuing the community level care and at least providing Medicaid level treatment, which would be the MRI in my situation, the sciatica. So that's the changes we hope to see.
Yeah, I'm sorry we had these technical difficulties, but I'll send you a link to the video so you're able to watch it afterwards. And yeah, so thank you, Leslie, for laying out some really concrete ways and some important practices to improve healthcare in prison. And I think in terms of changes, we hope to see it is important also to be frank about the limits to that change. And be clear about, if this system is truly like unable to keep people healthy, to even keep people alive, then we need to concentrate on getting people out of it. And so there are a variety of ways that this can be done. First, with detainees. As of the population report this morning, 509 of the 1,353 people who are incarcerated in Vermont are being detained. So these are folks who are being held, just to be really clear about that, being held before they've even been convicted, of the crime that, they're being held for. And so, keeping people in the community before they're convicted of crimes is an important one. And then also thinking about sentencing reform for people who have been convicted of crimes. First, there's good time legislation that was passed for everyone, and then that was rescinded for people with like more serious or violent felonies a couple of years ago. And this is an important one to think about because this is also like exactly the older population that we talked about earlier. And so when we think about good time for all, second look legislation, ending life without parole, the vast majority of the folks who would be helped by these are folks who are 50, 60, 70, even 80 years old, and who have these health conditions that need more care than the prison can provide. And so to ensure their safety, it's really important to let them out. And then finally, just thinking about, some future decisions that some of y'all will be making in your committees and y'all will be voting on at some point about what the state will do for potentially replacing CRCF. And again, just being clear, not just about the recent past, but about decades of history, where in 2003, Jim Quigley died at Northwest State Correctional Facility. We were promised in the wake of that an overhaul of the grievance system, which then was reviewed by the state auditor last year. And I hope you all have seen that report. If not, I can send it to you, where he said that the grievance system within DOC was so flawed that it was difficult to even conduct a system-wide audit where they had to only focus on localized cases. And then when Kenneth Johnson died in Newport in 2019, we were promised a culture shift. We were promised practices and policies that would avert this kind of tragedy in cases where urgent medical care was needed. And we see almost exactly the same kind of situation in the case of David Mitchell and the care that he was denied. And so truly, like, this is not some kind of, rhetorical question. This is an honest question that I'm interested in talking with you all about in the future. Like, at what point do we say that this system can no longer reform itself, that giving it more money, that giving it more resources, more power is not going to contribute to better outcomes when we've tried this again and again, the same things. So, it's really important to be frank about that. And I hope this is an ongoing conversation with you all about how we can invest, not just to ensure the health of people who are incarcerated, but the health and safety of all of us moving forward. So we have a couple of recommendations and also questions, which Leslie is going to finish with here.
Well, we're not going to ask questions of the committee. So you can You can state your questions, but I don't expect them to answer them
Okay,
directly at the time.
that's fine. That's fine. I'm going to be
He will provide a commentary after.
Okay, I'm just actually going to go talk about recommendations for WellPath. And I looked around on the website and I saw that the job requirements for all of the WellPath healthcare providers, RNs, LPNs, PAs, nurse practitioners, MDs, the only certification they need besides their license is CPR. And I really don't feel like CPR is adequate. There is a next level up called ACLS, Advanced Cardiac Life Support. It's not that difficult to attain. I think anyone who's working in a prison should have ACLS because the emergency services response is slowed going through the Sally ports and whatever else you have to do to get there. So I think a lot of the jobs I saw posted also were listed 1 year experience, which is not that much experience, especially in an emergency. So we recommend ACLS for their staff. We recommend increasing staffing in the medical department so that sick slips can be answered and timely and people can feel heard and treated. We recommend following the care a person was provided in the community. We've mentioned that a number of times. I also feel that nursing needs to have the basic skill to start an IV in an emergency. If you're waiting for the ambulance to arrive, by the time they get there, it might be too hard to get an IV. You know, you want to get an IV right when a person goes down. And I also feel very strongly about what goes on in the infirmary. I don't know what kind of equipment they have in the infirmary, but if someone does not have ACLS, they don't know how to read a cardiac monitor. So if you have someone in an infirmary on a cardiac monitor and you don't know how to read that rhythm, what's the point? You know, if you can't recognize that the person has an irregular rhythm or whatever's going on with them, what is going on in that infirmary? You know, I haven't been in the infirmary. I'd love to take a tour, but if individuals are being held in infirmary instead of being sent to the emergency room, then the people in that infirmary should know how to be critical care providers. That's it for me.
This is our last round of musical chairs. Just read the questions that we have. So first for WellPath, we're curious what menu of services are available, what's the approach to preventive care, how much mental health treatment is available and what range of options, what kind of therapy do they provide and what forms, and what are the theories, what are the foundations behind this therapy, what are people trained in? And then also really important, especially thinking about the oversight role that you all play, how is treatment documented and what barriers exist to being able to understand the treatment people are getting? And how can we remove those barriers as much as possible to understand more of what's going on? And then also some questions for the commissioner, which hopefully I think you might already be prepared to answer in your PowerPoint. But yeah, we're curious, where at the last meeting you mentioned more than 300 emergency department visits, and we would love to see these records reviewed by a medical professional. And that these could be a really important window to research and to understand where the care is lacking and where we can improve care so that it truly can save lives. So understanding the diagnoses in these cases, what was the outcome? And yeah, we hope to be able to collaborate on that soon because yeah, it is so crucial. So yeah, with that, thank you all for hearing us, for inviting us to speak, and for having this really, really important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There may be questions from the committee of various people, but I wanted to just give a few points. I don't disagree on the need to continue to inform, continue to lower prison population, but I will point out that since 2008, our prison population has been reduced by over 1,000 people. That in and of itself is a major accomplishment that I don't think any other state, when you look at per capita numbers, has achieved. Done through a variety of efforts, and everybody at this table was involved in some way and somehow. As a member of the Advisory Board of the Justice Center. I've had an opportunity to compare our record with other states. Justice Center for the Council of State Governments runs the justice reinvestment programs around the country. Today, we have about 1,386 prisoners. That was actually yesterday. Of those, as you pointed out, there were state detainees were 465. Federal detainees were 73. We don't control the federal detainees that are in our prisons. But we can do better than 465. That I don't disagree with. Of the population in state, there was 1,137 males, 123 females. Only 126 people out of state. When we started, there were over 750 people out of state. To look at that since 2008 is a major accomplishment. Vermont's number 4 in the nation and the lowest per capita incarceration rate. Doesn't mean we're doing great. Doesn't mean that everything is fine, and I understand that from the perspective of family members and others. But I think it's important to note that we have a lot to do, but that as you reduce your prison population, and this is missed by a lot of folks, you have a much more difficult population, more violent, more mental health problems, more people who have other issues who should not be in prison. They should be in the mental health system or they should be in the jail system. But the institution of last resort becomes the prison. And that I think we have to keep in mind, and that is something that all of us need to look at. You all who are advocates, and those of us who represent you. Because if inappropriate, prisons have a place, quite frankly, in my view, it's just my view, for those that are so dangerous that we need protection from, or some who need protection from themselves. But by and large, I think that's the population we should be looking at, and the detainees. Is it necessary to detain everyone? We did a look at prison, in Senate Judiciary, we did a very high-level look at life without parole. There were 16 people in that category. Listening to the families of their victims, they were all murders. It was something that was really difficult for my committee, some of the most emotional testimony I've ever heard. So I will say that we continue to look at ways to improve. I don't know much about WellPath. I do know that years ago we had the state employees who were the healthcare providers. Maybe that's something that we should be looking at again. I did look at WellPath before this meeting and find out they have a $1.26 billion in revenue. That's quite a bit of money. And in Massachusetts, the Department of Justice investigated them on the mental health issues and found that they may have violated the constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment for those with mental health issues. I don't know what the outcome of that was. So I hope that we will, as a committee, will look at WellPath and what some of the alternatives may be. I know, we don't sign contracts in the legislature. We approve what the administration does or don't approve it, but I think we should probably ought to be looking at alternatives. That's just my personal opinion, and there may be others. So with that, I'll open questions from the committee of any of the witnesses, and I thank you all for the presentation. It was well done and clear. I'm sorry the video didn't work, but that often happens with technology. Any questions? Thank you all very much. And I don't know if that, Commissioner, are you prepared to?
When you're ready, sir.
I think, Jonathan, I think you're related to people that we know. But I don't know if you're related to the Elwells in Bennington.
A ways back.
A ways back.
Yeah,
Well,
a few generations.
I know them well. Anyhow. Commissioner?
Can I just make one comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. I just want to thank you all for being so clear and having looked at information and data and brought us some of your perspective and your recommendations. Senator Sears and I have been working on healthcare now for many years. 100 years. Added up together, it's really a lot. In the prison system, and we share a lot of the concerns that you have, but we also understand that there are federal requirements and other requirements that preclude some of the things that would make a very robust healthcare system. So we'll continue to work and listen to you. I appreciate what you've brought to us. I'm also looking forward to the commissioner's discussion and what WellPath can and cannot provide.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to say that since there's so much stigma around sharing your story of being incarcerated or having a loved one who's incarcerated, it was extremely brave to share what you did. It's so important that we hear directly from people with lived experience, but it's also really hard. And with a 3-month-old and having gone through a C-section, you know, I really, really feel for you and what you went through, and I'm so sorry that happened to you. So I just want to appreciate what you all shared and hope that we can hear more from people with lived experience, and that hopefully this was a positive exchange so that people feel like they can come forward and share with them.
Commissioner.
Good morning. My name is Nick Dimmel. I'm the Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Corrections. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. I think that's a good place to start, maybe, is just to pause and reflect on some of the experiences that we just heard about, the stories as poignant and painful and acutely salient to us as they are, and especially for those of us who are working to reform and improve the system. We can't capture enough of those stories, perspectives, experiences, because they're really instructive to us charting our path to a better place. I agree with the senator that it's extraordinarily courageous to come. Don't take this the wrong way, but you can be a bit intimidating. Come here and tell a story that is really personal and intimate. And I think Vermont benefits from more of that in these forums. I think certainly my administration and the department that I run benefits from that. And we're working to seek other ways to bring that into the process, but including folks with lived experience in these forums, I think is critical. And so I appreciate the leadership of this committee in making sure that there was space for that, but also for the folks who joined us either with their personal experience with a loved one, a family member, a friend. I also think it's important to start by highlighting first and foremost that the department takes this work extraordinarily seriously and personally. We have staff on a daily basis who are working to improve the system, that's big picture, and improve the daily life of the individuals they're serving at a very local level within our facilities around the state. And this is, as at least the Senate Judiciary Committee and House Corrections knows, the health and wellness of our population is one of our 4 top priorities, the 4 areas that we really are focusing on and working to improve. And I'm happy to share some of that work with you today. But I wanted to underscore how important this is to us and that we take it very seriously. I also think, since I briefly mentioned staff, it's important to highlight that our staff live this experience on a daily basis as well. The trauma, the desperation that can occur is vicariously transmitted to the people who are living in the units, are working in the units, and helping the folks that we're serving on a daily basis. And as the Defender General and I have a very nice relationship. We talk a lot about this. One of the things he recently flagged to me was almost always the first person to provide care is not a medical provider, but a correctional officer. And that I don't want to step on his toes or testify for him, but that often that care is quite compassionate. It happens very quickly. And so I think it's important to highlight the role that the correctional officer, those public servants, play in the health process. We don't always talk about that because in Vermont, health is provided by an outside private institution. But the role of the correctional staff is critical to this. And so I think they deserve a great deal of thanks and appreciation for the service that they're putting in on a daily basis. But I think particularly as it relates to taking care of the human beings that we're charged with. So from there, we can go forward into the deck. I want to provide some context and discuss the path that we're taking to help improve our healthcare system. I know it was casted as blame, and I can appreciate that perspective. But I do think talking about and openly, transparently discussing the complexities of health in our system is important. And so I think we turn to this often to help not cast blame, but to illuminate the real change in the healthcare landscape, the true the condition that our population is in right now, because it has changed dramatically since the pandemic. And we met with a couple family members this morning, and I shared it's in part because of the pandemic, and in part, a second order, third order effect of the pandemic. So not necessarily because people got COVID, but because the healthcare landscape changed in that time period. And so we need to understand this if we're going to be able to start impacting these outcomes. And so that's why we continue to bring up the demographics. We continue to express that our population is significantly sicker than it was 5 years ago. Because if we don't recognize that and really appreciate that change, we cannot design a health system that's going to be responsive to that. And so we see that the population, as the senator pointed out, has decreased dramatically. I think a large part of that is justice reinvestment, particularly Justice Reinvestment 2. It's a lot of the reform work that this committee and your home committees have done to include bail reform, to include sentencing reform work. It also is in part because of the pandemic. I mean, that was a watershed moment for our system where we really did finally push out populations that probably didn't deserve to be there. They were in for low-level offenses or short interrupts. All of that appears to be working. I think that those reform efforts are working, and we're seeing a major decrease in the total population. And so Senator Sears was right to highlight what we are left with is just over 1,300 folks, close to 1,400 folks. And they end up being the most complex individuals and cases that we have to deal with. And so they deserve a different response that is more enveloping and holistic. We highlight often that 90% of our prison population is on medication. There's a variety of different medications. Many people are on multiple medications at the same time. Nearly 60% of our population is on opioid use treatment medication. So more than 1 in 2 individuals are on just opioid use treatment medication. And we know that substance use issues stem far longer than just opioid use. So we know folks have alcohol dependency issues and other things. We have 1,000 out of the 1,300, I think it's around 1,350 folks today who have a chronic illness. And we also know we have this data about the individuals. We also know, and I'll be very candid, that the prison environment is not the most therapeutic environment. We talk about that often. Most often, we're talking about that as it relates to mental health, but that applies to physical health treatment as well. And somebody highlighted in the presentation that we had over 300 ER visits last year. It's 354, which means that nearly once a day, an individual is leaving a Vermont prison to go to an emergency room. I'll share with you that, I'm skipping ahead, Isaac will get mad at me for not using the slides in order, but I'll tell you today, Vermont has 2 incarcerated individuals in Connecticut because there are no hospital beds available in Vermont. And one of those individuals has been there since before the 4th of July. So this is not simply Vermont, this is not simply a Vermont prison problem, it's also a Vermont community problem and healthcare problem. When we turn to seek assistance, often that assistance isn't there. ICU beds are not available, surgery wards are not available, nursing home facilities, which we spent a lot of time talking about this year in House Corrections, are not available. And so we have Vermont correctional staff sitting in Connecticut. We brokered a deal very graciously with the state of Connecticut to help us cover the second individual. But these are the outcomes that we're dealing with for folks who need a high level of care. And it's something we are working hard to try to address, but the challenges continue to compound and in different and unique ways that Vermont had not experienced in the past. I mean, it was very rare for an incarcerated individual to leave the state of Vermont for healthcare prior to the pandemic. And now that's becoming a regular occurrence, whether it's Albany, Boston, Connecticut. Some of the challenges we've started to talk about. As this committee knows, we suffer from significant staffing challenges. I'll talk a little about the progress that we've made on that front, but it means that our field staff, who typically our probation parole officers or community corrections officers, are covering hospital coverage in our hospitals when individuals leave the facilities, or are on standby 24 hours a day waiting for the call to have to go to a hospital because we don't have enough security staff in our facilities to cover that historically facility related duty. We have, in the last 3 months, have had individuals in New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut being served by other hospitals because our own state hospital system is also feeling overburdened by the volume of community members needing healthcare. I think painfully for me, we have individuals who, but for a nursing home or a care facility in the community, placement, are instead sitting with us. If a bed were available, they would be there today, and they're not 1 or 2 folks. I mean, I think we're talking close to 30 individuals. We have worked to address that problem, but as the folks, particularly probably on the health committees know, those systems are also overtaxed, not by us, but by the broader community system. To make that very acute for you all, what that has resulted in is folks who are living out their final days in a Vermont prison on hospice care provided by our healthcare provider with correction staff sitting there to help them through that process, and then ultimately dying in a prison because there was no other place for them to go. Where that gets even more painful is if the individual maxes out of their sentence at that time, our hands are tied and we have to release them, but there's nowhere to take them. And so, as Representative Emmons knows, that often means we take them to the Springfield Emergency Department at Springfield Hospital, because at least there we know there are medical professionals who can help them with that last phase of life. I mentioned briefly the availability of acute care beds across the state is a serious problem. Routinely, those beds are not available when we call and need them. So that's for folks who require hospital level of care, which is not provided in the Vermont correctional system. But when we turn to the hospitals, often it's very challenging. And that's not to cast any aspersion on the hospital system. They're suffering right along with the rest of the systems of care in that there's not staff available. when there are staff available, they can't properly facilitate the placement in a facility. It really is a challenge in the state of Vermont right now. The staffing issue cross-cuts all disciplines in healthcare. I think I won't speak for our WellPath colleagues or previously our Vital Core colleagues, but staffing those positions is very challenging. I think if you asked our University of Vermont Medical Center colleagues, they would tell you the same thing. So finding well-trained, qualified individuals to take those roles is a huge gap across the state. And then going back to the complex populations, I mean, there is not a day that I've been the commissioner where we've not had individuals who have a myriad of challenges, either disabilities, significant mental health issues, who fit in categories that, as Senator Sears said, would probably be better served somewhere else, but that somewhere else doesn't exist or there's no space available.
Good. Just to be understanding the availability of care providers in terms of psychiatric care, psychologists, even professional level mental health workers. WellPath provide that, or does the department have to provide that?
That would be covered under the healthcare contract. So WellPath would provide mental health care practitioners, a slew of different qualifications.
Given what level can we get some, perhaps not this meeting, but the next one, specific information about the mental health care?
Sure.
For offenders, both in the community as well as in the facilities.
We would
I'd like to really
provide that service. Provide that service in the community, but we would.
Well, but we do. I know we send people to the local mental health center who live, who require mental health treatment. Frequently go, and that can be a condition of their probation or their parole.
That's true.
So I'd like to better understand what we're doing in terms of mental health and substance abuse, et cetera. Do you want to make sure I've said it right?
Well, it seems to me this is a very broad question, simply because there's so much change that's happening right now within mental health programs and systems. So it would be helpful to have you reach out to the Commissioner Hawes perhaps, and to others, and to look at what expansions are taking place, whether it's through telemedicine, telehealth, or through clinical access, local, whether there are mobile facilities. And for me, I'm very interested in what the contract is going to say, or says already. I would very much like to see that contract and understand what capacity is there for mental health as well as for other things. But
maybe you can send a copy of the contract to Ben. Can then distribute it.
I'd be happy to do that.
That'd be great.
To clarify, for folks who require psychiatric inpatient level of care, that is traditionally provided by the VPCH through the Department of Mental Health.
But there are no beds there.
But it's challenging to find beds there, yes. That's right. But we'd be happy to provide that and also do a full map.
At Riverview, we have, there's so many things that are happening that I don't know whether the changes are actually demonstrating reduced pressure on the system and whether that's coming. But you can't have one part of the system working independently from everything else.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Representative Wood.
Commissioner, when you were talking about the use of out-of-state healthcare facilities because our hospitals lack capacity, is it your impression that they lack capacity in general, or they lack capacity for the patients that you were trying to bring to them?
I think it's certainly true to say that they lack capacity in general. I know that the hospitals and the agency human services, the UH, track bed availability on a daily basis. and that is routinely oversubscribed.
Representative Edmonds and Senator Norris, Senator.
I just want to clarify when you mentioned about going to the state hospital. That when that situation occurs, it's only to stabilize the person.
That's right.
And once they're stabilized, they do come back to DOC for further mental health care. So I want to make that clear. They don't stay at the state hospital.
And that's similar, if I may, that's similar to physical health conditions that require an ICU type setting. When they stabilize, they're returned to our system, yes.
So I just wanted, because a lot of folks haven't been involved. The other thing too, we worked on this, I believe, it was pre-pandemic, 5 months ago maybe. Yep. That there is an MOU between the Department of Corrections and the Department of Mental Health in terms of the mental health care of someone when they're incarcerated. I would like to see that MOU.
Okay.
Send that to Ben too.
Ben, I'll have to get his email machine fired up.
Sorry. Or Peggy Delaney.
We'll make sure it gets done.
Get it to. Senator Norris.
Yes, Commissioner. In an earlier slide, you had mentioned there's approximately 1,400 incarcerated individuals within the state, but you went on to say that approximately 1,000 of those individuals suffer from chronic illnesses. My concern is that seems like an awful high number, and it seems like you're running more of a hospital setting than you are a Department of Corrections here. What is the definition of chronic illness? Is that something that DOC sets, or is it a medical definition of chronic illness?
It's a medical definition, medical standard, and we can provide that to you. I mean, I think you're right to highlight, we look like a prison, but we are in fact a hospital system, a nursing system. We're also a school. For a while, we were in business, building things. But it's to say that we're a microcosm. We just happen to serve the folks that often have run out of other options. In the agency human services, we highlight often that folks in crisis usually end up in one of three places: homeless, in an emergency department, or in a prison. And oftentimes the population we're serving is cycling through all three. And I think that's because other systems of care are also failing, and the folks are not breaking out of these cycles. It is a high number. I think it highlights that while Vermont as a state is also getting older, and there have been indications, particularly post-pandemic, that the state is getting sicker, we're seeing that very acutely in the correctional system. That's challenging. And I think we are trying to get at what are the underlying causes of that. But you know, we run a very interesting system in Vermont. We're a unified system, so we have everybody who's in any type of detention or incarcerated setting in the state. There's only 5 other states in the country that do that. Every other state has a county jail system and then a state prison system, and they're bifurcated. The issue there is, particularly as it relates to detainees, which the senator pointed out is well over 400 today. They can be with us for 3 hours. They could be with us for 3 years with the court backlog. It's very difficult to manage that population. And then separate from that, we have folks who are sentenced and are with us for a long period of time. But if you go back to the math, 1,000 out of 1,300 means at least some of the detainees are also suffering from chronic illnesses. What we've found in conversations with VDH, the Department of Health, and some of our hospitals is the Vermont prison system is essentially a sentinel site for healthcare. Many folks first access healthcare at the prison. That they did not have access to community health care. And so folks are presenting very sick. I mean, the substance use issues are only exacerbating that as we see folks come in, go through very severe detox or withdrawals. And it's difficult to separate out what is a substance use issue that can be treated, what is a physical health care issue that can be treated, and where those things overlap. So yeah, where prisons used to be places for detention, they've really become a full suite of services. And certainly I think we all agree that that continues to need improvement. And we need to provide those services better, but we don't often get to decide who we get in our system. So we're presented with folks that are very challenging. We're trying to meet those needs and really striving for that.
Thank you. Commissioner, you were quick to say that someone's no longer your responsibility, I think, in relation to mental health when they're in the community. But you also said that 90% of people in the prisons are on some kind of medication. So I didn't know if it was a surprise to you to hear that people might be struggling to get their first prescription refill right when they leave, if that's the responsibility of WellPath. You know, others on committees of jurisdiction may know more about the transition and how obviously clear of a link to recidivism and death that can be if people can't get continued care right when they leave. So I'd love for you to speak to that. And I would be curious about nutrition improvements. I mean, I think when we've seen those in our schools, we've seen that. I always say, meals are like the 40 million we spend to get $1 billion worth of value out of the rest of someone's life. It's a small cost actually to really improve health and well-being for a population. So I didn't know if you had metrics where you're trying to improve nutrition as well.
Excellent questions. I think the nutrition question, if I can take them in the reverse order, might be better if we came back to present to you our nutrition system. It's related but distinct from the health system. And I think that'd be helpful to discuss.
Yeah, the last time I talked about prison nutrition was Nutrilo.
Oh, yes. That was bad.
Well, fortunately, we
long before
so if I might kind of demur on that question, but promise to bring back a presentation on that, I think that could be helpful for this group. The other question I think is a really salient one. It's not surprising to me, the story about prescriptions in the community. And there is some degree of trying to connect folks out to the community. I think the biggest hitch here is nearly all, very, very many of our population would be Medicaid eligible in the community. But in the United States, incarcerated individuals are not eligible for Medicaid under federal law. There is an effort afoot to expand Medicaid eligibility 30 days prior to release from a correctional system. Those folks wouldn't go on Medicaid and Medicaid start paying for their health care for those 30 days. But what it would allow us to do is connect them with providers in the community. We could help get them enrolled in Medicaid. And then when they left our facilities and went to the community, they would already have Medicaid insurance and ideally connections to primary care providers who could support their medical needs in the community. That cannot happen under the current framework. And so what happens is individuals get right up to their release date. And I think, I don't know the specifics of some of the cases we talked about today, but I think WellPath and previously Vital Core made an effort to try to get them prescriptions so that they could connect on the outside. But as soon as they leave the doors, that's where our legal involvement with that process ends, and we're no longer their medical provider. But they then have to go out and connect with Medicaid. I don't know if you've ever tried to fill out a government form, but they're not always the most simple process to go through. And often we're talking about folks with complex needs, and that may exacerbate their ability to successfully complete that. So we're kind of pushing people out the door without the kind of parachute they need. And I think we've talked to the federal delegation about that. I know the Vermont federal delegation supports that legislation. We're hopeful. It's also something that President Biden's administration is working very hard on, is trying to expand Medicaid eligibility in an carceral setting.
I have an agenda problem. We have the public immediate program that was scheduled for 11:30, and I'm sure a lot of people are waiting. So we could ask you to finish up with health system improvements and then maybe go to the next slides.
Sure.
At the next meeting.
Sure, absolutely.
The system alternatives. Because there's a lot of questions about healthcare that you can't go back with anymore.
So I think the big takeaway here is we recognized coming out of the pandemic that the health landscape had changed dramatically. I think most acutely in the mental health side of the house, but also in physical health. And that required us to revisit our contract structure and try to address these needs. And so we did that. We put the contract out for bid. Vermont received 2 bidders for health services in the state. We selected the most competitive bidder based on a variety of criteria, and that was WellPath. They started in our system on July 1st, and so they're new, and I think we're all getting our legs under us, but we're cautiously optimistic that this will help us to move this whole system forward. I think some of the important things that we wanted to highlight were really ensuring that the vendor was able to provide robust mental health services. That's going to include telehealth services, and I think that's really important because there's a shortage of mental health providers in the state of Vermont. We can provide significantly more care if we can expand into telehealth, not as a replacement, but to add to the amount of services that are provided. And we also talked significantly with WellPath about connecting their work to our values and making sure that they can deliver the Vermont community standard of care. And that's our goal as we move forward with the new vendor. I will say it's highlighted on the bottom of the slide. That came at a cost. I mean, healthcare prices are skyrocketing. That's driven, I think, largely by staff, but not only by staffing costs. And so Vermont saw a $10 million annual increase in the cost of health services in our correctional system. I know, Senator, you asked that I not go to the next slide, but I want to preview just one thing. We have tried to estimate what it would cost for Vermont to take over its healthcare system and run it as a state system. And that cost we estimate to be between $80 and $100 million a year. We're at 33 annually right now.
Is that the exact same system, or would it be an improved system?
That would be to create a system where we could provide basically the care that's outlined in the contract right now. That adds substantially to the costs. I think there's also a question about whether the state could adequately recruit and provide the level of service to the scale that we need to. I think this is one of the issues where Vermont runs into a problem that we can't create economies of scale due to our size, particularly as it relates to health systems and things like this. But that is an option we've considered, is how do we bring it in-house and could we do that? And I think it's difficult to see a path forward on that. The other would be to turn to one of our healthcare systems in the state of Vermont and seek their administering a health program. There's not been a lot of appetite for that, but I also think they would experience the same types of challenges that an outside vendor provides. And then the third option is finding a separate entity to do it. But as I said, we put the contract out for bid this year and only received 2 bidders and chose what we believe is the better of the 2 proposals. Yes, ma'am.
Can you get us how the estimate, how you got to the?
Yeah, we can break down those costs for you.
Representative McCarthy.
I know that we're running out of time, but there's a couple of things that were said that I want to make sure taking care of them doesn't wait for the next meeting. First one, and if I was wrong in hearing what you said, you talked about acute care and calling the hospital to see if they had a bed available.
Mm-hmm.
That goes along with another statement that was made by one of these people here, talking about medicine keep coming, the medicine kept coming and they didn't need it. Are you aware of that?
Well, I'm not aware of that specific case. I will say all of the decision-making about treatment is done by the medical providers, not by the Department of Corrections. And that's important because they're trained medical professionals making those medical decisions.
Yeah, okay. I understand what you're saying.
Sure.
My request is that you look into that to see if that is happening and put a stop to it.
Sure.
The other thing about calling ahead, to me, if a person is in need of care right away, like they mentioned, people with heart problems, you can't call the hospital and say, hey, you need to take the person there.
Sure. Yeah.
So I would like you to look into that to make sure that's not happening.
Yeah, maybe I can clarify. In the instances where we seek out an acute care or a higher level of need bed, those individuals require that level of care, but it's not emergent. If an individual needs emergent care, they're taken by ambulance. And as I mentioned, we did that 354 times last year.
Yeah, okay, then the definition of acute and emergent.
Yeah, that would be the so acute would be, oh goodness. If we have an individual who has a chronic condition that's worsening that requires hospital level care, perhaps surgery, something of that nature. But if I don't have 20 minutes, that won't exacerbate that, but we do need to get them there usually within a 24-hour time frame versus you've fallen and broken your leg or you're having a stroke. That would be an emergent need and you'd be transported by ambulance. Usually the acute care folks are also taken by ambulance, but it's not as time sensitive necessarily. If it were, we would take them.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And David Thompson's here from WellPath. He's on Zoom. And I wonder if we can reschedule to the next meeting, David, if that would be. Understood. I know we've run long on time. I appreciate your being here and listening to the testimony, and I'm glad you didn't fly up from Nashville. Thank you. And we look forward to hearing from you at our next meeting in September. Look forward to it as well. Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, Mr. Doss. The next issue is one that's going on as long as I've been in the Senate, which is a long time. It's the public inebriate program. I'm going to start with Kelly Doherty, who's the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Health. Kelly with us. She's on Zoom.
Good morning.
We understand there were two closures of public inebriate programs, one in Franklin County and one in Lamoille County. And there aren't many around the state. We wondered what the status of the public inebriate program is and that impact on DOC or Department of Corrections.
Yep. I'll start just for the record. My name is Kelly Doherty. I'm Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Health. Thanks for having me this morning. So yes, you are correct, Senator, that two of our funded programs for public inebriate services in Franklin County and in Lamoille County opted to close starting July 1st of this year. So starting with FY24. So those programs collectively, well, I'll separate them out. In FY23, so the year ending June 30th, the St. Albans program screened a total of 225 people in their PIP program. So not everyone who is screened ends up either in a PIP bed or at corrections or at a hospital. Sometimes they're screened, found not to be incapacitated, and can be released to a responsible adult family member or friend. Of those 225 in St. Albans during FY23, 57 of those, or 25%, were diverted to DOC, with the remaining 110 remaining in the PIP program. I'm sorry, is there a question?
No.
Okay. In Lamoille County, we actually only have data from them for the first 2 quarters of FY23, but if I annualize those data, there would have been 92 individuals screened, with 24 being diverted to DOC, which is also about 25% of the population, and the remaining 52 staying in the PIP. So I know it's early, we're only in the second week of August. I may refer to my colleagues at DOC to see what impact they're seeing so far from that. You know, but I can say, I mean, I think it's likely that there will be an impact. Although I will say, just statewide, we have seen a pretty dramatic decrease in the number of people presenting at public inebriate programs over the last several years. And for FY23, we don't have all of the data in yet, but it looks like we're on track to have screened less than 1,000 individuals statewide, compared to almost 1,200 in FY22 and 1,400 in 21. So the numbers have been decreasing across the state.
Thank you. Are there questions for Kelly? Kelly, I appreciate it. Are you going to stay on? Because our next witness is Al Cormier, the Chief of Operations, Department of Corrections.
Yep, I'm happy to stay on.
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question for Kelly?
Can you clarify, when you say 225 people or 1,000 folks statewide, is that unique individuals? Or is that some folks are coming through the system constantly?
Yeah, I think it is not unduplicated. I will confirm that, but I'm almost certain that that's not unduplicated. So it could be multiple. It could be individuals presenting multiple times.
It could be individuals presenting multiple times. Okay.
Yes.
Now, what's the impact on DOC? Do you have any sense?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Al Cormier, Chief of Operations for the Department of Corrections. Yeah, so we expect to see an increase based on the numbers that the Deputy Commissioner Doherty just presented. We have seen a decrease statewide since over the last 10 years, which is encouraging. The concern for us, and we work with VDH and DSU on this topic, and we'll continue to do so. The challenge for us is these people, they come to our system, but they don't appear in our system. They're a ghost. They're not charged with a crime. They don't get entered into our offender management system. We have, just coming off the healthcare discussion, we have very limited ability to provide healthcare to this population because they're not in our system. So that requires a call to an ambulance should there be health concerns with somebody coming in. We're seeing an increase in inebriated folks that we don't know what the cause of that inebriation is. That causes concern for our staff. 10 years ago, the majority of that was alcohol. Now we don't know what these individuals are presenting with in the state when they arrive at our facility. So we continue to treat, we continue to monitor, we take care of this. Right now, the impact has not been great, but we do expect to see an increase. Part of the challenge with the LaMoille County and with also coming out of Burlington is, as you recall, 2 years ago, we diverted the men from Chittenden facility. There used to be intakes of both men and women in the facility. From a best practice, we diverted all men out of that facility. We don't believe that there should be men coming into the women's facility. Those are all going to Northwest now. So that takes up additional time for law enforcement. That takes up additional time for the transports to occur. And I only see that increasing on the law enforcement side. The other challenge for us is around releases. When they are zeros or have served their 24 hours, they're released. And again, they're not in our custody any longer. That presents a challenge when they're picked up in Chittenden County or LaMoille County and they're in Franklin County. How do they get back? That's presenting a problem, and I believe Lieutenant Weatherby will be speaking about that. But we're seeing the challenges. These are challenges to your earlier point, Senator. We've been talking about this for a long time, and it's an issue that we are concerned about. So it's kind of a guessing game at this point with are other programs going to close or others going to open? That's really the question as to what that impact may be for us.
Thank you, Al. Are there questions for Al, Senator, Representative? I'm going to make you a senator.
No, I don't want to be a senator. I'm going to stay where I am. Al, can you share with us where are these folks housed when they're coming into a facility and they're there basically until the next morning, or they've slept it off?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a great question. So in our facilities, we have our intake and booking area. Most of those folks will reside in the booking area overnight. They may go into a single cell, depending on the need and depending on the numbers. I know this is part of our request in our Northwest expansion because we have started seeing that increase in the numbers up there. We currently have a limited number of beds at Northwest in the booking area. So on a weekend, which is when historically we see the greatest increase of the incapacitated population, it's overcrowded, and we see those issues. But they do not go into general population. They stay in the booking area because, as I had stated earlier, they technically don't belong to us.
Senator Norris and then Senator.
Yes, this is probably a question for the Deputy Commissioner, but quickly, what is the reason for the closure of these facilities? Is it a staffing issue? Is it a financial issue? If you could expand upon that, please. Yeah,
it's both. So the programs are having a very difficult time finding staff. So oftentimes, the workforce situation, in the social service arena and other places is definitely impacting these programs. So there's a staffing issue. Also, their funding has stayed relatively stable over the last number of years. But we all know that costs go up year over year. One of the challenges that we've heard with staffing is that, these are 24/7 programs. So, staff have to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's difficult to staff that, especially when the staff that are on call are being paid at an on-call rate rather than actual working wages. They would be paid working wages if they actually have an intake. So that's a challenge, as well as the unpredictability of the utilization of those beds. So it's difficult to, if there are surges and then there are times when beds are empty. So it's just, it's kind of an unpredictable system, but workforce is definitely a big part of the issue.
Thank you on that. I've been trying to get a hold of the Howard Center, and I have some correspondence with them. I guess what I'm interested in is, I'm from Franklin County. I'm interested in the actual costs that are incurred within Franklin County. Is that something that we can get hold of as a committee?
Yeah, sure. You mean their actual costs for running the program?
Yes.
Yep.
And the staffing shortages quite possibly?
Say that again?
And the staffing shortages quite possibly?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Senator Lyons. No?
Oh, I'm going to ask a question at the end,
Okay.
going back to the contract question.
Okay.
Well, that's going to be my question.
Al, anything further? Commissioner, did you have anything? Why don't we go right to Mr. Robert Bick, the Executive Director of the Howard Center. Bob, it's been a long time since I've seen you in there.
It has, Senator, and as you accurately stated, you've been dealing with this issue for a very long time. So I'm not sure what the committee was hoping to hear. I can tell you that I appreciated the Deputy Commissioner talking about the numbers. It's really interesting because if you go back 10 or 12 years, our public inebriated program in Burlington, the Act One program, alone would screen 22 to 2,400 people a year. This past year, that number is down to just under 200 people. And so there are a number. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Bob.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm out of state and I'm using my phone to make this connection. As folks have said, staffing is a huge issue in the Franklin County program. We had to rely heavily on existing staff who work in other parts of the agency to take on call shifts. We were trying to run, I think, somewhere between 13 and 15 different people to try to cover the shifts that would be necessary. And as the Deputy Commissioner pointed out, that's an on-call program, so you never know when there's going to be a demand for the services. The Act One program, I'm going to mention that again because that was a fully staffed 24-hour day program. A 24-hour day program where we actually had staff in the program. We actually allowed clients to walk in as well as folks that are brought by the police department. But during COVID, what we really saw was law enforcement, both because of staff shortages in their department and perhaps because of a desire to minimize contact with individuals, substantially cut back on the number of folks they were bringing to the program. And when the shift was made to move men to Franklin County for law enforcement in Chittenden County, it became an extra stop to come to our program to determine whether we were going to be able to house the person or we needed to send them to Department of Corrections. It became, I think you might hear from them, more efficient to just go to the Northwest Correctional Center. I think in terms of thinking about strategy going forward, I think we need more screeners than the current statute permits. I think mobile crisis staffs across the agencies, across the state, could be in a position to do screening. I think there's some question about whether it might make sense to think about state police to be able to do screenings, outreach and crisis staff. There are a number of outreach programs now around the state where those staff could be trained to also do the screenings. But frankly, the program has been grievously underfunded for many, many years. And, you know, part of the challenge, obviously, I get it. The legislature needs to balance multiple priorities. But this has been a program that has the opportunity to intervene with individuals at a moment when they are perhaps open to understanding what brought them into contact with the program and create a door into treatment and recovery. So while the economics were not huge in the St. Albans area, right now, because of staffing, in the Burlington area, which is the high volume public inebriate program in the state, we're at a point where we're only able to do limited screenings. We're not able to house people at all. You know, that's a program that has been losing somewhere between $250,000 and $350,000 $1 million a year for the last 4 or 5 years. So from an economic perspective, if we were able to get the staff that we need, our organization's going to be need to make a hard choice about whether we can actually sustain that kind of a loss.
Question from Bob? Bob, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next witness is Michael, Dr. Hartman from Lamoille County Mental Health Services.
Thank you, Senator. Let me just correct the version that you have there. I'm a master's in social work, and I'm the executive director at Lamoille.
Okay.
They attempted to elevate me, but I'll decline.
Maybe I'll make the lieutenant a captain.
I think I would really echo both what the deputy commissioner spoke to and what Robert Bick spoke to in terms of the numbers going down. That is a phenomena that started with COVID, and that is a mixture, I think, of the public availability of drinking in bars and outside other kind of pieces that went away during the early part of COVID. And the numbers have been going up slowly. And considering that we don't really see a huge decrease in the use of alcohol, I wouldn't see any reason why the numbers wouldn't return back to where they were. Truthfully, I would see some reason why they might even go up from where they were. But I think we similarly to the Howard Center ran into the same problem, that our funding was actually cut by 50% back in the about 2018. We immediately went into a loss with that. And we did get some of that cut back, but basically for the last 4 years, we've lost about $100,000 a year, very much for what Bob states, where we do have to pay under our contract with the union. We have to pay people a on-call rate. It's not an hourly rate the same as what they would make, so it's the lowest we could pay. But that by itself is just about $10,000 short of the entire contract to cover that for the whole year. So costs for people actually working and getting the higher pay when they're working, costs for the building, et cetera, cause that loss. And there hasn't been an increase in the program in the 10 years that I've been here overseeing it. So, compare that to 20 to 30% increases in other kinds of programming. And again, I don't think this is a fault of anybody, not interested in blame, just interested that I think, as Bob said, we lose a real opportunity when we can't have contact with these folks. We've at different times tried to do some outreach to people who show up frequently. We've tried to do some follow-up work in the community with the police to make visits afterwards for situations where these have been the folks who were involved in public inebriate. And they had limited success, but they had more success than what we're doing now. We have continued to be part of the response for the police about when they do pick up a person for public inebriation, but that's as far as we can go with it at this time. And I think that the concern that I have greatly is that we have a pretty strong community network here of healthcare and mental health and substance use providers. And we tried for 6 months before July 1st to see if we could find an alternative to this for the community to still have the service. And there really isn't any other capacity in the community for it. So at this point, the majority of folks are now going to custody because there isn't an alternative where they have any supervision, unless they're so much in medical need that they might meet the criteria for staying in the emergency room. And I think that probably covers it.
Thank you. Other questions? I really appreciate the testimony from both you and Bob, and in terms of, I don't remember making a 50% cut in funding for that.
Wasn't this year.
Wasn't this year, but
No. And it was a decision to spread the wealth, so to speak. So the half that we lost went to Northeast Kingdom to try to start a similar program up there, but I don't think.
Now I understand.
Yeah.
I remember Senator Starr. We can blame Senator Starr for that. All right, thank you.
If I could just make a comment,
sure.
I mean, this is really troubling for me, particularly hearing the testimony from the Commissioner of Corrections earlier, just half an hour ago, in terms of our community systems are starting to fail. And then it puts more pressure on DOC. DOCs are always the default. And nobody sees DOC because it's behind closed doors. And that's always concerned me. And this is putting more pressure on DOC, where people are going to get lost in the system that need support services, and it's not given to them. And the other piece that plays into this is the DOC budget is funded directly through our general fund. And our DOC budget at this point is about 180 million. This is going to put more pressure on DOC's budget. And it's going to put more pressure on their staff because they have no linkage to the folks who are coming in on the public inebriate situation. And there could be some real legal consequences if something happens in that 12-hour or 24-hour time that they're in a booking bed. That's a concern that I really have in this.
Well, I'll put
I mean, we've been dealing with this, Dick, for 20 years.
more than that. I don't know. I didn't even know there was a program until I got elected.
Right.
Found out we were failing in 1983.
Yeah, well, that was something else too.
And Deputy Commissioner.
Yeah, the Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you. I just want to echo Representative Emmons. I share your concern, and VDH and DOC. We had been meeting regularly up till the COVID pandemic to really start to think through how we could best sort of limit the number of diversions that go to DOC. And, you know, we're continuing to have conversations, and we're committed to working together moving forward to try to make this as palatable of a situation as we can. So just want to reassure you that we're working in collaboration with our DOC partners on this, and that we share your concerns.
Our next, thank you, Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner. Our next witness is Jason Weatherby, Lieutenant with the St. Albans Police Department. Jason, thank you for joining us this morning. And I know Senator, you probably spoke with Senator Norris about this.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to pass on the promotional opportunity as well. Thank you. So yeah, I concur. We can concur with a lot of the things that are being said here today. One of the big issues is for us is there's talk about us doing our own potential screenings. By statute, we're not allowed to do that. It has to be done by a substance crisis team or a substance abuse counselor, or a medical professional. In that case, we'd be looking at bringing individuals to the emergency department. I don't think it's a new fact for everyone that the medical fields and the emergency departments are already generally overwhelmed and understaffed themselves. The way this whole process is kind of going down and or went down kind of left us last to know, but the individuals holding the bag to figure out what to do with folks. So there was a community conversation that took place yesterday with hopes of figuring out what we can do with some of these folks when we do encounter them. There's multiple agencies in Franklin County that utilize this system. Obviously, we're short-staffed ourselves, much like most other law enforcement. So running a 2 to 3 person shift and sending someone to another county for a PIP program, it's not really practical and or safe. So I guess the long and short of it is we're trying to work obviously with our local partners here with Department of Corrections and the hospital staff. but August 31st is close, and we just don't want that door to shut and it to be forgotten at the end of the day.
Can I just, so I fully understand, you confront an obviously inebriated person, and what do you do then after August 1st?
It's a great question. We utilize the same things that we try to do currently. We try to figure out if there's someone that is able to take care of them, a family member that is willing and able to take care of that individual. Secondly, it looks like we're probably going to end up statutorily at the hospital in the ER, looking to have them screened by a medical professional to in fact deem that they are incapacitated. They generally, and I won't speak for them, won't have the ability potentially to house them. And then in the case, we'd be delivering them to the correctional center.
Currently in a correctional facility, they're there about 24 hours. And then they're released. And they may have no way to get back to wherever they came from or whatever.
Right.
But that's not a great system either. So,
well, they're being introduced into the correctional facility
right.
For being incapacitated, and as opposed to a criminal charge,
Right.
in and of itself. Sure.
So,
I just want to clarify, when we say public inebriates, in the old days, it was folks that were drunk, alcohol. Are we just seeing that when we say public inebriates, is that just what we're talking about? Or is it also now including folks that have severe substance use disorders? Are you seeing both, or is it mostly alcohol?
No, we're seeing both. We're seeing an increase in all kinds of substance use with the folks coming through our door. And that's one of the additional challenges for us, because we don't know what they're on. We're not providing drug tests to see what they're on, which increases the concerns that we have with that population and the added burden on our staff for monitoring that.
And there's also an added safety measure, depending on what a certain individual may be on. They may be more susceptible to acting out or acts of violence, which generally isn't good for a hospital setting either.
It might, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just to say it might be helpful.
Senator Norris and Representative Wood.
Okay. I'll be very quick. It might be helpful for folks to understand what protections are offered when an individual is in the public inebriate program. So protections from arrest. That's a question.
Generally, if someone is being introduced into the public inebriate program, it's not an arrest. It's for their safety or the safety of others, so that they can hopefully be introduced to resources that may be available, so they're not in the situation again, and or a safe place to get back to a functioning level.
I would just add that I think also the protection is that the person is able to be closer to home, and there is the possibility that we may be able the next day, when somebody has reached a better level of sobriety, we also can engage with them with the recovery center and some other resources to try to help them hook into some kind of care. And as we were doing this, about 70% of the folks who stayed were willing to engage in further discussion and follow-up with the local preferred provider for substance use care. So that was also an additional feature that is gone because of this situation.
Senator Norris and then Representative Wood.
Yeah. Lieutenant Weatherly, how you doing?
Good, thanks, sir.
If you could just explain the process as far as if the public inebriation program closes and law enforcement picks up an individual and there's no place to bring them, they must bring them to, by statute, to the hospital. Is that correct?
Yes, at this point, that's the only location currently that we have that has one of the listed means necessary to deem them incapacitated to be brought to corrections. Yes.
So is it my understanding that while you're there, you can't leave them there? They're still in your custody?
Generally speaking, yes, they're going to be in our custody until we can essentially get them to an approved facility to take care of an individual in that capacity. Yes.
So you could be there for an undetermined amount of time then, law enforcement?
It could be 30 minutes. It could be 4 or 5 hours, potentially. Yes.
Okay, well, I think bringing up, if someone needs medical attention, I think that'd be very beneficial. Obviously, if they go to the hospital, but if they don't need medical attention, I think that by bringing these individuals who are under the influence of something up into the emergency room setting, kind of flies in the face of S36, which we both passed last year, as the protection of the health workers within the facilities here. So I think this is very problematic, and hopefully we can come up to some type of resolution here within the committee to maintain this program, or at least work with those individuals who oversee this program and come out with a positive finish on this program. So thanks for being here, Lieutenant.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to make sense out of the data that the Deputy Commissioner reported in terms of the decreasing number of people who are being screened each year and the increases that DOC is seeing. So it seems though that it's relatively around 25%, and 25% of a decreasing number is going to be a smaller number. I'm just trying to figure out the connection there. And then the second question would be for Mr. Hartman about, is it just a matter of dollars and cents? So, I mean, if that deficit were erased, would you be continuing your program? So.
Double question.
Two questions. Yeah, I thought I'd just get it in. So, you know.
Deputy Commissioner, if you want to go.
Yeah, sure. So the actual raw numbers of the individuals screened and the individuals being diverted to corrections are both going down. It's just that the relative percentage of the number of people, at least until the closure of these two programs, recognizing that will have an impact, has remained, relatively stable. So when you look at the raw numbers, they're both going down, as are the relative percentages. But like I said at the start, with the closure of these two programs, I think we can anticipate that there will be an impact on corrections.
Okay, so I'm seeing Mr. Cormier nod his head. I just had understood him to say that they were already seeing an increase, and I'm just trying to determine if the no, sorry, I guess you weren't you weren't live there. Now you are. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that question. And just to clarify, we expect to see an increase with the closure of the PIPs. We understand and we see the decrease as well in the numbers.
Okay.
But with the PIP programs closing, we anticipate that there will be an increase to corrections because there's no other alternative for them.
Okay, thank you.
The question for Mr. Hartman and maybe Bob Bick, if he's still with us, is if you had the funding, would you continue the program?
Yes.
From our perspective here, the answer would be yes. We were asked by the community to start the program back in, I think about 2011, 2012, have run it pretty much with a loss every year, but the losses just mushroomed in the last few years. And so there was no interest in closing the program. There was interest in trying to close the gap financially. And there really wasn't. We tried to find some grants and some other things to do that, but we really couldn't find alternative means to keep the program open. And after 4 years of those losses, really had to close it. But it would take we already closed ours as of July 1st. So it would take a little time to hire folks and fill in those positions, but most of them are still around and really would be glad to come back on. So it wouldn't take long to do it. but we can't do it at a loss anymore. Thank you.
It seems, this is just a comment, it seems like counterproductive for us to now be having to send people to the most expensive place in our healthcare system, the emergency room, from a community-based program, which is the least expensive place for them to be screened and served. It makes zero sense.
We have as a committee.
We can make a
We can make
recommendation
recommendations.
for January.
I would ask Ledge Council to draw up a recommendation that would be based upon the testimony that we would recommend that they do everything in their power to deal with this in budget adjustment and try to refund these two programs, they being the Department of Health, I guess.
And how about also looking at the screening
And the screen.
by statute? Who's that?
Well, before we get too far down
That's a
that
big,
road.
that becomes a big issue that's important to look
I
at.
think if you could do that, and we could vote on that before we leave this afternoon, we could send a letter to Commissioner of Health, Commissioner of Finance, and or Secretary of Administration, I guess. Maybe the two secretaries on behalf of this committee, if we adopt whatever, based upon the comment. Bob, are you still with us?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, the question, I guess, would be, if funding were available, would Howard keep the program?
Well, like Mike indicated, we have closed the program. We are open to having the conversation if the funding were adequate and sufficient. I think the challenge obviously is staffing. And I can't tell you how quickly it will take to try to staff up. I do want to highlight that we are currently operating the Act One program in Burlington on a shoestring right now, both in terms of staffing and limited screening only. And so if, and that program, the losses are far more substantial. And so if there's going to be a conversation about trying to resurrect or sustain the existing programs, because I do know that there's a couple of other providers across the state who are also struggling. I think it's a systemic conversation that really needs to take place. We're happy to be part of that conversation and look for a solution. I don't know who said it, but it definitely makes a whole lot more sense to try to serve these folks in the community where they are at far less cost than it will cost to have them served in the emergency room.
Or in corrections too. We have one more witness, Louis Danderond, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, the Director of Emergency Medicine at Northwestern Medical Center.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for having me. I am the medical director in the emergency department at Northwestern Medical Center in St. Albans. And the closure of PIP in our county going to have a huge impact on our department. And so we've had conversations related to that. I want to clarify that the PIP program has not yet closed here. So the impacts are not felt yet. It's closing August 31st. So it has not closed yet. I want to also mention that this decision to close PIP in our county was made without any input from the local stakeholders. I was not involved. None of our administration, the hospital were involved. Police department was not involved. All the stakeholders that are most impacted, including the local director of Howard Center here in Franklin County, apparently had no say in this decision. So it was made at a level that was not, conducive to One, finding alternatives. And then we were presented with this problem to solve in a matter of weeks. And it's a big problem. The cost of screening these folks, as it was pointed out, will fall on the highest cost center in our county in terms of healthcare. And currently, the process for screening individual for incapacitation is done oftentimes outside of the emergency department, not even including healthcare professionals with Howard Center screeners, and it's been very, very efficient. So screeners are called. The police officer will present to a screen directly outside of the medical center, and within minutes can have a decision that yes, the patient's incapacitated, and then make a decision of whether they go to the Howard Center bed or to corrections. In most cases, the individuals would end up being housed at one or the other. The corrections was used if the person is not cooperative and won't do a blood alcohol. Corrections would be used then. Otherwise, if the patient's willing, they would just be held in a safe place at the Howard Center. And this program's been in place for years, and it worked very efficiently and beautifully. And it's being pulled back so that there's a huge gap in how we're going to manage these folks. And it's basically gonna come back to the highest cost center for medical care in the community. I mean, we'll manage it, because we have to by statute. But that's really what the result of this closure is going to be. We're talking about approximately 20 people a month, not quite one a day. The other issue is that on top of the screening is that those folks, one, need to be screened, basically evaluation. So once they show up on our campus until it kicks in, and we have to get vital signs and do a complete medical evaluation. It takes time. So we'll take a police officer out of service for the amount of time that takes. And then that person will need to have housing. So if they're uncooperative, potentially go into Department of Corrections. Otherwise, they'll have to sober up in the emergency department, taking another probably 8 to 12 hours of time of our staff to manage these folks. So this is very costly. The alternative, very, very costly. So we're looking at budget dollars here, and we're looking at the highest cost center possible to manage these folks moving forward without PIP. So I just want to mention these few things. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I thank all of you very much. We'll come back to this later on in the meeting in terms of the resolution, and then I'm sure we'll come back to it in a future meeting as well. The problem doesn't go away. It just becomes somebody else's problem. In this case, probably DOC and the emergency rooms, which are already, I can speak for my own emergency room in Bennington because I'm frequently visiting there with my wife. And, it's not easy. They are overworked and overbooked. Why don't we get back together at 1:15, which, Peggy, if you could just let the witnesses for the afternoon competency evaluations know, we'll get together at 1:15. Thank you very much.